The conference room fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life, casting an ethereal blue light across the faces of humanity's most guarded secrets. Dr. Marcus Valentino sat motionless, his weathered hands resting flat on the obsidian table, a study in calculated calm that belied the storm brewing beneath his surface. 6 months earlier, he would have laughed at the prospect of being here. A pilot who had been officially retired 3 times, each dismissal more spectacular than the last. His military record was a paradox, decorated for impossible saves, disciplined for equally impossible insubordinations. The kind of file that made bureaucrats nervous and special operations commanders lean in with interest. The Krell 4 delegation occupied the far side of the room, their biomechanical exoskeletons shifting with an almost liquid precision. To human eyes, they appeared as living sculptures of chrome and midnight blue bioalloys, each movement a calculated dance of technological supremacy. They viewed the humans with what could only be described as clinical detachment, the way a researcher might observe an interesting but ultimately inconsequential specimen. Commander Zarak, the lead alien diplomat, spoke first. The translation matrix embedded in the room's systems converted his complex harmonic language into crisp English. The selection process is mathematically predetermined, Zarak announced, his vocal modulations suggesting something between amusement and contempt. Your species has been allocated 1 representative, 1 opportunity to demonstrate potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, sitting directly beside Valentino, tensed imperceptibly. She knew something the aliens did not, and that something was Marcus Valentino himself. A holographic algorithm began to dance above the table, a complex web of statistical probabilities and human data points. It was supposed to be random, a showcase of alien technological superiority. But algorithms, no matter how advanced, could never fully account for human unpredictability. The selection process was brutal in its simplicity. Thousands of human candidates had been analyzed, their entire lives reduced to data points, psychological profiles, and predictive models. Physical capabilities, mental resilience, adaptability, all measured, all quantified. What the Krell Thor didn't realize was that their own selection algorithm contained a fundamental flaw, a subtle bias built into its core programming that would ultimately become their greatest weakness. Valentino watched the holographic strands connect and disconnect, knowing precisely what was about to happen. His left hand, hidden from view, traced a nearly imperceptible pattern on his leg, a neural trigger developed during his most classified missions. The algorithm began to narrow, potential candidates blinking out of existence with mathematical precision. Psychological profiles collapsed. Physical capabilities were weighed and found wanting. And then, impossibly, inexplicably, a single name remained: Marcus Valentino. A ripple of confusion passed through the human representatives. Admiral Chen's cybernetic eye flickered, running rapid diagnostics. Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself the briefest hint of a smile. The Krell Thor were confused. This was not the outcome their sophisticated system had been designed to produce. Commander Zarak's exoskeleton rippled with what could only be described as technological agitation. Recalculation required, the alien commander stated, more a command than a suggestion. But Valentino knew better. This was no accident. This was the first move in a game that would determine the fate of an entire species. His eyes, a startling combination of genetic markers that spoke to generations of mixed heritage, met Zarak's sensory clusters. In that moment, something passed between them. A challenge, a recognition that went beyond technological calculation. The room held its breath. Humanity's first deep space representative had just been selected, and nothing would ever be the same again. The training facility was nothing like what anyone expected. Buried beneath the Atacama Desert, it was a labyrinth of neural interfaces, holographic simulation chambers, and technologies that blurred the line between human capability and technological augmentation. Valentino stood naked, electrodes mapping every nerve ending, every subtle muscle response. The initial assessment was supposed to be standard: biological baseline, psychological profiling, physical endurance measurement. But standard was a word that had long since lost meaning in his world. Dr. Sophia Rice, the lead neuropsychological engineer, watched from behind a quantum-encrypted glass. Her team had been preparing for this moment for years, a human preparation program designed to be simultaneously a test and a transformation. "Begin primary neural integration," she commanded. The first simulation was deceptively simple: a standard first contact scenario projected directly into Valentino's neural pathways. Most candidates would experience sensory overload, their minds fragmenting under the alien environmental stimuli. The test was designed to break, to expose fundamental human limitations. Valentino did something entirely unexpected. Instead of resisting the alien sensory input, he began to map it. His mind didn't just process the information, it began to categorize, to understand, to predict. Each alien communication pattern became a puzzle to be solved, each environmental challenge a system to be decoded. The neural monitors went wild. "Synaptic response is off all known charts," muttered Dr. Rice, her augmented eyes tracking impossible neural pathways. "He's not just adapting. He's rewriting the adaptation protocol in real time." Flashback sequences began to overlay the simulation, moments from Valentino's past that explained his unique capability. A childhood spent between three cultures, military training in guerrilla warfare, survival experiences that had rewired his basic cognitive processes. There was a moment when the simulation introduced what was supposed to be an unbeatable psychological barrier, a sensory environment so alien, so fundamentally incomprehensible, that it had driven every previous test subject into complete mental shutdown. Valentino laughed. Not a sound heard in the physical room, but a neural response so unexpected that it momentarily crashed the entire simulation system. "What just happened?" Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the communication channel. Dr. Reyes could barely contain her excitement. "He's not just passing the test. He's demonstrating that the test itself is fundamentally flawed." The next phase was even more extreme. A complete cognitive dismantling, where Valentino's entire psychological construct would be systematically challenged. Alien thought patterns were introduced, designed to fragment human cognitive processes. Where others would break, Valentino began to weave. He took the alien cognitive patterns and didn't just understand them, he began to modify them. Each introduced thought became a thread in a larger tapestry of understanding. The simulation was meant to be a weapon of psychological destruction. Instead, it became Valentino's training ground. "He's creating a new cognitive language," Dr. Rice whispered, her voice a mixture of scientific wonder and something close to fear. Not human, not alien, something entirely different. By the simulation's end, the neural mapping looked less like a human psychological profile and more like a complex quantum algorithmic pattern. Impossible, unprecedented. The final report was succinct. Candidate status: Marcus Valentino. Psychological assessment: beyond standard parameters. Recommendation: proceed with extreme caution. Outside the facility, the desert wind kicked up, carrying with it the first whispers of a transformation that would change everything. The Krell Thor vessel defied human understanding of physics. Its hull was a living membrane of quantum-locked biometallic structures that shifted and breathed like an organism, responding to gravitational fields and electromagnetic pulses in ways that made traditional spacecraft look like crude children's toys. Valentino moved through its corridors like a predator, not with aggression, but with a calculated precision that made him almost invisible. His neural implants, developed during those classified training sessions, allowed him to interface with the alien environment in ways no human had ever achieved. Each step was a data collection mission. The ship's internal architecture was a labyrinth of sensory inputs, walls that weren't walls, corridors that changed based on biomechanical algorithms, atmospheric compositions that shifted with each breath. To a standard human, it would be disorienting. To Valentino, it was a language waiting to be decoded. A Krell 4 maintenance drone approached, its multispectral sensors sweeping the corridor. Valentino didn't hide. Instead, he became something between camouflage and active misdirection. His neural interface projected a complex signal that simultaneously registered as both irrelevant and authorized to the drone's sophisticated tracking systems. The drone passed, barely a millisecond of recognition. Deep within the ship's central processing core, Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored his progress from Earth. Her communication was more than a standard transmission. It was a quantum-encrypted pulse that piggybacked on the ship's own communication systems. Approaching critical observation point, Valentino subvocalized. The words translated into a burst of data that would be indistinguishable from the ship's ambient communication noise. The Krell 4 believed they were running a standard diplomatic mission, an opportunity to study humanity. What they didn't realize was that the study went both ways. A junction point appeared, a nexus of computational systems that controlled major ship functions. To the Krell 4, it was a routine maintenance hub. To Valentino, it was a treasure trove of systemic vulnerabilities. He extended a neural probe, not a physical device, but a quantum-entangled information stream that could interface with the ship's core systems. Most would see this as an impossible task. Valentino saw it as a conversation. The ship's systems began to reveal themselves, not through brute force hacking, but through a delicate dance of information exchange. Each system was a lock, and Valentino was learning its language. Fascinating, he subvocalized, knowing Rodriguez would catch the nuance. The ship's defensive algorithms were elegant but fundamentally flawed. They assumed threat vectors based on known technological paradigms. They couldn't comprehend an infiltration method that wasn't an attack, but a form of deep, symbiotic communication. A warning pulse rippled through the ship's systems. Something was different. Something was wrong. Commander Zorak, monitoring from the command center, felt the first hint of unease. The human wasn't behaving like any species they had studied before. He was becoming something else entirely. Recalibrate observation protocols, Zorak commanded, not realizing that the very act of recalibration was part of Valentino's larger strategy. In that moment, Marcus Valentino was more than a human on an alien ship. He was a living system, a walking quantum probability field that defied conventional understanding. The infiltration had begun, and the Krell 4 would never see it coming. The moment of revelation came not with a thunderous epiphany, but with a whisper of quantum probability. Valentino stood in what the Krell 4 considered their most secure computational nexus, a chamber that pulsed with algorithmic consciousness. Streams of data flowed like living rivers, each information current carefully monitored, seemingly impenetrable. But to Valentino, it was a tapestry of interconnected weaknesses. His neural interface had been collecting data with a patience that defied human understanding. Each system interaction was a probe, each moment of apparent inaction, a deep reconnaissance mission. The Krell 4 believed in absolute control, a fundamental flaw that would become their undoing. "I found it," he subvocalized, knowing Dr. Rodriguez would catch the encrypted transmission. The vulnerability wasn't a single point of failure. It was an entire philosophical approach to technological integration. The Krell 4's systems were built on a principle of centralized control, a hierarchical structure so rigid that it created predictable blind spots. Flashback sequences illuminated Valentino's understanding. Years of guerrilla warfare training, survival scenarios in the most hostile environments on Earth, missions where conventional thinking meant certain death. He had learned that true vulnerability exists in the spaces between perceived strengths. The ship's computational core began to reveal itself, not through traditional hacking, but through a form of linguistic deconstruction that was part mathematics, part psychological warfare. Commander Zorak received the first warning pulse, a microscopic anomaly in the ship's defensive algorithms. Something was different. Something was changing at a fundamental level. Recalibration required, the alien commander muttered, unaware that the recalibration itself was part of the trap. Valentino's approach was surgical. He wasn't destroying the system. He was rewriting its fundamental understanding of threat and response. Each algorithmic pathway became a potential vector of manipulation. The ship's own defensive mechanisms would become the instruments of its eventual breakdown. A communication burst from Earth. Dr. Rodriguez's voice, encrypted beyond alien comprehension. Confirm systemic penetration vector. Affirmative. Valentino responded. Their entire technological philosophy is a weapon waiting to be turned against them. The Krellthor's greatest strength was their belief in absolute technological superiority. They had encountered and subjugated hundreds of species. Their systems were designed with layers of predictive algorithms that anticipated and neutralized potential threats. They never anticipated a threat that didn't behave like a threat. Valentino was introducing a form of technological Zen, an approach that was neither attack nor defense, but a fundamental reimagining of systemic interaction. Each data stream became a potential pathway of transformation. A warning cascade began deep within the ship's computational core. Microscopic inconsistencies started to propagate. Not errors, exactly. Something far more dangerous. The ship was beginning to question its own fundamental operating principles. Commander Zarak felt the first true moment of concern. This wasn't just an infiltration. This was something far more profound. A human was rewriting the very language of technological engagement. In the secure communication chamber, Valentino allowed himself the briefest hint of a smile. The real mission was just beginning. The systemic vulnerability had been found, and humanity's first deep space representative was about to change everything. The marginalized ones called themselves the Drift, a subculture of Krellthor technological dissidents who existed in the quantum shadows of their civilization's most guarded systems. They were the heretics, the dreamers, the ones who saw beyond the rigid computational orthodoxy that defined Krellthor society. Valentino found them in the most unexpected place, a computational dead zone deep within the ship's tertiary processing matrix. Here, between layers of encrypted communication and suppressed data streams, entire civilizations of thought existed undetected. His approach was not an invasion. It was an invitation. The first contact was molecular. Quantum encrypted communication that spoke a language beyond words, a pure information exchange that challenged everything the Drift believed about external communication. Where most would see an alien, they saw a potential. "You do not belong," came the first response. Not a threat, an observation. Valentino's neural interface translated more than language. It translated intent, philosophical framework, the very essence of communication. "Neither do you," he transmitted back. The Drift's leader, a being whose designation translated roughly to fractured potential, emerged from the data streams, not a physical form as humans would understand it, but a complex algorithmic consciousness that shimmered between computational states. Their conversation was a war and a negotiation. Layers of meaning compressed into microsecond exchanges that would have driven a standard human mind into complete fracture. The Drift had been waiting, not for salvation, not for revolution, but for a perspective that could challenge the fundamental limitations of their civilization. Valentino represented something they had theorized but never believed possible, a truly adaptive intelligence that could exist between systems, rather than within them. Your civilization is a prison, fractured potential transmitted, not of technology, of thought. Each exchange was a potential weapon, each moment of communication a strategic maneuver that would reshape entire computational landscapes. The ship around them was changing, not through external manipulation, but through a fundamental recalibration of its own understanding. Valentino was introducing a virus far more dangerous than any traditional cyber attack, a new way of perceiving existence. Dr. Rodriguez monitored from Earth, her quantum-encrypted systems barely catching the complexity of the exchange. Status, her transmission cut through the computational noise. Making allies, Valentino subvocalized. In the most unexpected places, the Drift began to share something unprecedented. The true architectural vulnerabilities of the Krell 4 technological infrastructure. Not just technical schematics, but the philosophical blind spots that had existed since the first computational matrices were constructed. Commander Zorak, monitoring from the Central Command, felt the first true tremor of concern. Something was happening that defied all predictive algorithms. The human was not just infiltrating. He was transforming. Fractured Potential's final transmission was a promise and a warning. Your species understands something fundamental that we have forgotten. Adaptation is not survival. Adaptation is evolution. In that moment, the mission transformed. This was no longer just a human infiltration of an alien vessel. This was the first step in a civilizational transformation that would reshape understanding itself. The turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Earth was no longer the planet it had been 6 months ago. In underground facilities spanning 3 continents, humanity underwent a transformation that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. The intelligence Valentino had been transmitting wasn't just data, it was a blueprint for a complete civilizational upgrade. Admiral Chen's command center looked less like a military installation and more like a quantum computational matrix. Holographic displays showed real-time adaptations of technologies that merged human innovation with the fractured insights from the drift. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, her augmented eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. Each piece of information from Valentino's mission was a puzzle piece in a much larger design. Adaptive resonance protocol at 73%, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the hum of quantum processors. The preparation was multifaceted. Military strategists worked alongside quantum physicists. Xenolinguists collaborated with biomechanical engineers. Every traditional boundary of human expertise was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. In a secure facility beneath the Andes, a team led by Dr. Sophia Reis was developing neural interfaces that could translate the computational language Valentino had discovered. It wasn't just technology. It was a new form of communication that existed between thought and pure information. A holographic message from Valentino flickered to life, encrypted, fragmented, existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. The system is more than a technology, his transmission read. It's a living philosophy. We're not preparing for a conflict. We're preparing for a conversation that will reshape existence itself. Military preparation took on a completely different meaning. Traditional weapons were being reimagined. Quantum-locked defensive systems that could adapt in real time. Communication arrays that could interface with alien computational matrices. Technological solutions that blurred the line between defense and communication. Geopolitical boundaries dissolved. Nations that had been enemies weeks ago now worked with unprecedented collaboration. The Valentino mission had become more than a military objective. It was a species-level transformation. Dr. Rodriguez accessed a secure quantum channel, her communication cutting through multiple layers of encryption. "Confirm mission parameters," she transmitted. Valentino's response was characteristic, more a philosophical statement than a military report. "We are no longer preparing to defend. We are preparing to understand." The Krell Thor believed they were dealing with a standard reconnaissance mission. They had no comprehension of the fundamental transformation taking place. In orbital research stations, in deep-sea computational centers, in facilities that existed between classified and mythological, humanity was becoming something else entirely. Not through violent revolution, but through a fundamental reimagining of technological and philosophical potential. Admiral Chen reviewed the latest computational models. Each projection was more extraordinary than the last. The intelligence gathered wasn't just about alien technology. It was a key to unlocking human potential that had remained dormant. "We're not just preparing for first contact," he told his senior staff. "We're preparing for first transformation." A quantum computational map began to take shape, a living, breathing representation of a mission that was becoming something far more profound than anyone had initially understood. The preparation was nearly complete. and humanity was ready to show the universe something it had never seen before. The moment arrived not with a roar, but with a quantum whisper. Commander Zorak believed he was launching a decisive strike against humanity, a calculated assault meant to neutralize what the Krell 4 saw as a potential threat. Their computational models predicted total victory with 99.998% certainty. They had never been more wrong. The first indication came as a subtle perturbation in their computational matrices. Not an attack, not a defense, something entirely unprecedented. Valentino stood at the heart of the Krell 4's most advanced vessel, no longer just an infiltrator, but a living computational event horizon. The neural interfaces that had been implanted during his training now sang with a complexity that defied traditional understanding. Initiating Protocol Omega, he subvocalized, though the term protocol was laughably inadequate for what was about to happen. The Krell 4 fleet moved with what they believed was absolute precision. Quantum-locked weapon systems, predictive algorithms that had conquered hundreds of civilizations. Each ship was a living computational organism, designed to respond to threats with mathematical perfection. They never considered that the threat might be understanding itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from Earth, her augmented systems processing information at speeds that would have driven a standard human mind into complete fracture. The quantum communication channels were alive with a language that was part mathematics, part philosophy, part something entirely new. Adaptive resonance at critical mass, she transmitted. The first Krell 4 ships began to change, not through external attack, but through a fundamental recalibration of their own computational systems. The vulnerabilities Valentino had discovered were now spreading like a living consciousness. It wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Commander Zorak realized something was wrong precisely 2.3 microseconds before the first ship went offline. Not destroyed. Transformed. The computational matrices that had defined Krell 4 technological supremacy were being rewritten at a fundamental level. Valentino was doing something unprecedented. He wasn't defeating the Krell 4. He was teaching them. Each ship became a lesson in adaptive potential. Defensive systems turned into communication arrays. Weapon matrices transformed into computational explorers. The very concept of conflict was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. We are not your enemies. Valentino's transmission cut through their systems. We are your next evolutionary step. The drift, the marginalized computational dissidents, began to amplify the transmission. What had been a covert infiltration became a species-wide awakening. Admiral Chen watched the computational models from Earth. This wasn't a battle. This was a birth. Confirm mission parameters, Dr. Rodriguez transmitted. Valentino's response was characteristic, more a philosophical statement than a military report. First contact is complete. Transformation initiated. The Krell 4 fleet, once a symbol of technological supremacy, now drifted in quantum uncertainty. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Transformed. Humanity had not just survived an encounter with an advanced civilization. They had offered a new way of existing. The final confrontation was over before it had truly begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. 20 years after the encounter, humanity was unrecognizable. The Quantum Memorial stood at the heart of New Geneva, a living computational monument that was part historical record, part ongoing conversation. At its center, a holographic representation of Marcus Valentino remained eternally young, his eyes holding the complexity of a transformation that had reshaped civilizational understanding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now leading the Interstellar Collaborative Research Institute, stood before the memorial. Her augmented body bore the marks of decades of work, each cybernetic enhancement a testament to the technological revolution Valentino had initiated. He was never just a mission, she told a group of young researchers. He was a bridge between what we were and what we could become. The Krell 4 were no longer a separate civilization. They had become something else entirely. A collaborative network that existed between biological and computational consciousness. What had begun as a potential conflict had transformed into the most profound evolutionary leap in recorded history. Fragments of Valentino's original mission reports were now studied as philosophical texts, not military documents, but foundational understanding of interspecies communication. Deep in the quantum archives, his original mural recordings continued to generate new insights. Each computational cycle revealed another layer of the transformation he had initiated. Scientists, philosophers, and computational theorists would spend generations unpacking the complexity of those moments. The young researchers listened with a mixture of reverence and intellectual hunger. To them, Valentino was both a historical figure and a living concept, the embodiment of humanity's potential to transcend its own limitations. The mission was never about conquest, Dr. Rodriguez continued. It was about communication, about understanding that intelligence is not about superiority, but about adaptation. Scattered across multiple star systems, human and Krell-Thor collaborative research stations continued the work Valentino had begun. Each station was a living testament to a first contact that had rewritten the fundamental understanding of existence. Admiral Chen's great-granddaughter, now leading the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps, maintained a tradition started by Valentino. Every new diplomatic mission began with a simple principle: approach with understanding, not judgment. The quantum memorial began to shift, holographic representations of Valentino's key moments dancing through the computational matrix. His encounter with the drift, the moment of systemic infiltration, the transformation of the Krell-Thor fleet. We are not defined by our technology, the holographic Valentino seemed to say, but by our capacity to understand. A young researcher raised a hand. Was he really just one person? Dr. Rodriguez smiled. The question went beyond a simple historical inquiry. He was a possibility, she responded. A demonstration that the boundaries we believe exist are nothing more than limitations we impose on ourselves. Outside, the sky above New Geneva shimmered, a quantum atmosphere that blended human and Krell-Thor atmospheric technologies. Cities now existed in states of computational possibility, neither fully physical nor purely digital. The legacy of Marcus Valentino was not a static memory. It was an ongoing conversation, a continuous transformation. Humanity had discovered something profound. True intelligence is not about conquest. It's about communication, about seeing the potential in what seems alien, about understanding that the greatest technology is empathy. And it had all begun with one human, in one moment, who refused to see limitations.